There dwelt in the land of a man whose name was A bra ham. And in that land the men did not serve the true God, but had set up false gods to whom they paid their vows. And God told A bra ham to leave his home and go to a land which he would show him. A bra ham did not know where the land was, but he had great faith, and knew that God would take care of him and bring him to the land he had told him of. So A bra ham took Sa rah his wife, and his brother's son, whose name was Lot, and they set out for the land which God had said he would show him. A bra ham was a rich man, and so was Lot, and they had a great wealth of flocks, and of herds, and of tents. And they each had a large force of herds men. And these herds men were at strife. And A bra ham told Lot it was best that they should part, and he said to him, Choose where thou shalt go. If thou wilt take the left hand, I will go to the right, and if thou wilt go to the right hand, then I will go to the left. So Lot looked round and saw that the plain of Jor dan was rich in grass, and would be a fine place for him and his herds to dwell in. So he made his choice at once, and went to live there. Two large towns were on this plain, Sod om and Go mor rah. The men in Sod om were full of sin, yet Lot, though a good man, went to live there that he might have a chance to add to his wealth. As soon as Lot had gone, the Lord told A bra ham that he would give to him and his heirs all that land as far as he could see it. And the tribe of A bra ham would be so great that no one could count them. Now Sa rah, A bra ham's wife, had a hand maid, that is, a maid of all work, whose name was Ha gar, and she came from E gypt. When A bra ham was an old man, God told him that he and Sa rah should have a son who should be called I saac. One day at the hour of noon, when A bra ham sat by the door of his tent, he looked up and saw three men quite near him. Then he ran out to meet them and bowed his face to the ground. And A bra ham bade them sit down and rest, and let some wa ter be brought that they might wash their feet. No one in those days wore such shoes as are worn now. Some went bare foot, and some wore just a sole tied to the foot with strings, which did not keep off the dust and dirt as our shoes do. So when one came in from a long walk, the first thing he did was to bathe his feet, as that gave rest and ease, and when guests came, the bowl was brought for their use. And A bra ham brought them food to eat, and stood by to wait on them, and when they had had their fill, went with them to show them the way. In those days the Lord came down on the earth and spoke with men, and it is thought that one of these three was the Lord, and the two with him were an gels. And the Lord told A bra ham that he meant to burn Sod om and Go mor rah for the sins of those who dwelt there. This made A bra ham sad, and he said there might be a few good men there, and he begged the Lord to spare the towns for their sakes. The Lord said he would do so if 10 good men could be found there. And the Lord left A bra ham, and he went back to his tent. At the close of the day, Lot sat in the gate of Sod om, and the two an gels came there. And as soon as Lot saw them, he rose up to meet them, and bowed down with his face to the ground. Then these an gels told Lot to take out of Sod om all those who were dear to him, and flee in great haste, as the Lord meant to set the place on fire. They were told not to look back, but while on their way Lot's wife turned her head, which was a sign that her heart was in Sod om, and she died where she stood, and turned to salt. But Lot and his 2 girls reached Zo ar at dawn of the next day. Then the Lord rained fire on Sod om and Go mor rah, and they were burnt up in fierce flame, with all that lived there, and all that grew out of the ground. In due time God gave Abraham the son he had said he should have. And the child grew, and as soon as it could eat, Abraham made a great feast. And at this feast Sarah saw that Hagar's son, Ishmael, made fun of her boy, and she begged Abraham to cast him out. Abraham did not wish to do this, but God spoke to him and told him to do as Sarah had said, for Isaac was to be their true heir. So the next day Abraham gave food and drink to Hagar, and sent her and her child out of his house. And Hagar took her boy and went to the waste lands of Beer-sheba. And when there was naught for the child to drink, he grew weak, and was like to die. And Hagar laid him 'neath a bush, and went off and sat down, and hid her face and wept, for she loved her boy very much, and did not want to see him die. And a voice spoke to Hagar out of the sky, and said, What ails thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Rise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine arms. And the voice told her that her son should be the head of a great tribe. And as she raised her eyes, she saw a well of water, and she ran to it, and gave her son a drink, and he was soon strong and well once more. And God was kind to Ishmael, and he grew and made his home in the woods, and came to have great skill with the bow.
You remember that in those times of which we are telling, when men worshipped God, they built an altar of earth or of stone, and laid an offering upon it as a gift to God. The offering was generally a sheep or a goat or a young ox, some animal that was used for food. Such an offering was called a sacrifice. But the people who worshipped idols often did what seemed to us strange and very terrible. They thought that it would please their gods if they would offer as a sacrifice the most precious living things that were their own, and they would take their own little children and kill them upon their altars as offerings to the gods of wood and stone, that were no real gods but only images. God wished to show Abraham and all his descendants, those who should come after him, that he was not pleased with such offerings as those of living people killed on the altars. And God took a way to teach Abraham, so that he and his children after him would never forget it. Then at the same time he wished to see how faithful and obedient Abraham would be to his commands, how fully Abraham would trust in God, or, as we would say, how great was Abraham's faith in God. So God gave to Abraham a command which he did not mean to have obeyed, though this he did not tell to Abraham. He said, Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love so greatly, and go to the land of Moriah, and there on a mountain that I will show you, offer him for a burnt offering to me. Though this command filled Abraham's heart with pain, yet he would not be surprised to receive it as a father would in our day, for such offerings were very common among all those people in the land where Abraham lived. Abraham never for one moment doubted or disobeyed God's word. He knew that Isaac was the child whom God had promised, and that God had promised too that Isaac should have children, and those coming from Isaac should be a great nation. He did not see how God could keep his promise with regard to Isaac, if Isaac should be killed as an offering, unless indeed God should raise him up from the dead afterward. But Abraham undertook at once to obey God's command. He took 2 young men with him, and an ass laden with wood for the fire, and he went towards the mountain in the north. Isaac his son walking by his side. For 2 days they walked, sleeping under the trees at night in the open country. And on the 3rd day Abraham saw the mountain far away. And as they drew near to the mountain, Abraham said to the young men, "Stay here with the ass while I go up yonder mountain with Isaac to worship, and when we have worshipped, we will come back for you." For Abraham believed that in some way God would bring back Isaac to life. He took the wood from the ass and placed it on Isaac, and the two walked up the mountain together. As they were walking, Isaac said, "Father, here is the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering?" And Abraham said, "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering." And they came to the place at the top of the mountain. There Abraham built an altar of stone and earth heaped up, and on it he placed the wood. Then he tied the hands and the feet of Isaac, and laid him on the altar, on the wood. And Abraham lifted up his hand, holding a knife to kill his son. Another moment longer, and Isaac would have been slain by his own father's hand. But just at that moment the angel of the Lord out of heaven called to Abraham and said, "Abraham, Abraham!" And Abraham answered, "Here I am, Lord." Then the angel of the Lord said, "Do not lay your hand upon your son. Do no harm to him. Now I know you love God more than you love your only son, and that you are obedient to God, since you are ready to give up your son, your only son, to God." What a relief and a joy these words from heaven brought to the heart of Abraham! How glad he was to know that it was not God's will for him to kill his son. Then Abraham looked around, and there in the thicket was a ram caught by his horns. And Abraham took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in place of his son. So Abraham's words came true when he said that God would provide for himself a lamb. The place where this altar was built Abraham named Jehovah-Jireh, the words in the language that Abraham spoke meaning, "The Lord will provide." This offering, which seems so strange, did much good. It showed to Abraham and to Isaac also that Isaac belonged to God. For to God he had been offered, and in Isaac all those who should come from him, his descendants, had been given to God. Then it showed to Abraham and to all the people after him that God did not wish children or men killed as offerings for worship. And while all the people around offered such sacrifices, the Israelites, who came from Abraham and from Isaac, never offered them, but offered oxen and sheep and goats instead. These gifts, which cost so much toil, they felt must be pleasing to God, because they expressed their thankfulness to Him. But they were glad to be taught that God does not desire men's lives to be taken, but loves our living gifts of love and kindness.
This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.